There are huge inequities in Australia. It's almost like we have two nations, those who live in the metropolitan context and those who live in outer regional, rural and remote settings. And the discrepancies in health status are enormous. We know that mental health and general health conditions are far worse in regional, rural and remote Australia, that mortality statistics are appallingly different.
Community mental health is such an important role across Australia, of course, but in a rural and remote setting, community mental health has an even bigger role and it is even more diverse. One day your work schedule could include assessments or sessions based in Darwin or in a city or in a community. And then the next day you might be flying out to a remote Indigenous community with the heart surgeon, the psychiatrist and the ear, nose and throat doctor. So the exposure you get to a range of issues and a range of dysfunction is just so big and so diverse, and something that you would never get in a metropolitan setting.
When you're out in remote areas, you're often the only person out there, not just psychologist but mental health person. You may have to respond to, say, suicide prevention, but that may entail you travelling for 70, 80 kilometres through rain and dirt and mud to actually get there. To fly them out, it's the equivalent of flying someone from Melbourne to Sydney.
At the moment we're going through drought. That has an impact not just on people living on the land, but throughout the communities, because those support services who support regional sort of stations and remote stations are suffering too, so it has an impact on far wider than just stations.
Alice Springs is one of those, iconic Australian towns, that lots of people talk about but very few people go to. So we feel really privileged to be able to live and work there. The social justice issues in Alice Springs are really kind of in your face. There's amazing learning opportunities around Aboriginal cultural issues. Walking around Alice Springs and hearing people speak Australian languages that aren't English is just a fabulous privilege. So it definitely has its challenges, but it's an incredibly rich and rewarding area to work in.
There's certainly a sense of community, and my experience is that psychologists in particular try really hard to connect with each other.
We don't tend to have too much of a voice, and sometimes it's, this works for a metropolitan area and we'll transfer that through to a rural or remote area. I think it's really important that psychologists working in rural or remote areas advocate for their communities and give those communities a voice.
Some people are reluctant to take the plunge, and it is a plunge to go to a rural and remote setting, but the payoff is so worth it.
Working in rural and remote is sort of my happy place. Yeah.